Every November we gather around tables filled with turkey, stuffing and pie, and we tell ourselves a story we've all heard since kindergarten. A story about pilgrims and Native Americans sitting side by side, sharing food and giving thanks. A story about friendship, peace, and unity. But like so many stories in American history, the truth is much more complicated, because the first Thanksgiving wasn't really about gratitude, it was about survival. And what followed that harvest feast changed the continent forever. This is the real story of Thanksgiving. Before the Mayflower ever crossed the Atlantic, this land was home to thriving nations. Along the coast of what's now Massachusetts lived the Wampanoag, people of the first light. To their west were the Nipmuc, and farther south the Narragansett. They farmed corn, beans, and squash, fished the rivers, and built towns linked by trade and diplomacy. When English explorers first sailed these shores in the early 1600s, they didn't find empty wilderness. They found organized societies with governments, faith systems, and alliances. But between 1616 and 1619, a mysterious epidemic, likely leptospirosis or smallpox brought by earlier Europeans, swept through coastal New England. Some areas lost up to 90% of their people. Whole villages were left deserted. By the time the Pilgrims arrived in 1620, the land around Cape Cod was a graveyard of what had been vibrant communities. The English settlers saw cleared fields and empty houses and thought it was divine providence. In reality, they were stepping into the aftermath of catastrophe. When the Mayflower dropped anchor in November 1620, the passengers were in trouble. They'd aimed for Virginia, but storms pushed them north. Winter was closing in. Only about half of them would survive the first winter. They built shelters on land that had once been a Wampanoag village called Patuxet. It had been wiped out by the epidemic just a few years earlier. That spring, they met Tisquantum, the man we call Squanto. He spoke English because he had been kidnapped years earlier by English sailors, sold into slavery in Spain, and eventually made his way back home. When he returned, his entire village was gone. Through Tisquantum, the settlers met Massasoit, the leader of the Wampanoag Confederacy. He saw a potential ally. His people had been weakened by disease, and the neighboring Narragansett were growing stronger. Aligning with these English newcomers could bring protection. So in March 1621, Massasoit and the English governor John Carver made a peace treaty. They agreed not to harm each other and to defend one another if attacked. It was an uneasy but practical alliance. Two peoples trying to survive a changing world. Later that autumn, the English harvested their first crops. Edward Winslow, one of the colony's leaders, wrote that they decided to rejoice together. Massasoit and about 90 Wampanoag men arrived, bringing venison and other food to share with roughly 50 surviving colonists. They feasted for 3 days, eating deer, wildfowl, corn, beans, shellfish, and squash. There's no record of turkey or pie. There were games, target shooting, and diplomacy. To the English, it was a chance to celebrate survival. To the Wampanoag, it was an opportunity to strengthen an alliance. To both, it was temporary peace, not the birth of a nation. No one there could have imagined that centuries later, Americans would turn that meal into a national myth. For a while, the alliance held, but as more ships arrived, the English hunger for land grew. By the 1640s, new towns pushed deep into Wampanoag territory. English cattle trampled native fields. Laws forbade hunting and fishing on land that had belonged to the tribes for generations. The balance of power shifted. When Massasoit died, his son Metacom, called King Philip by the English, inherited a broken peace. His people were losing their land and their sovereignty. By the early 1670s, English settlers were demanding that natives adopt English laws and Christianity or be treated as enemies. In 1675, war erupted. King Philip's War was brutal, one of the deadliest per capita in American history. Entire villages burned, hundreds of colonists were killed, but native losses were far greater. Thousands were executed, starved, or sold into slavery in the Caribbean. When Metacom was captured and killed in 1676, his head was displayed on a pike in Plymouth for 20 years. The same colony that once shared a feast with his father now celebrated his death. For the surviving Wampanoag, the war marked the beginning of centuries of displacement. The Thanksgiving story, as we know it, wasn't born in Plymouth. It was created more than 2 centuries later, in the middle of the Civil War. A writer named Sarah Josepha Hale, editor of Godey's Lady's Book and author of Mary Had a Little Lamb, spent decades campaigning for a national holiday of gratitude to bring the country together. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln declared a National Day of Thanksgiving, not to honor the Pilgrims, but to unify a nation tearing itself apart. By the late 1800s, Thanksgiving pageants were teaching schoolchildren that native people welcomed European civilization with open arms. History was rewritten into a fable of harmony. For native peoples, Thanksgiving is not just a holiday, it's a reminder. In 1970, a Wampanoag elder named Frank James, or Wamsuta, was invited to speak at a Massachusetts Thanksgiving celebration. When organizers saw his speech condemning colonization and broken promises, they refused to let him read it. Instead, native activists gathered at Plymouth Rock and declared the first National Day of Mourning. They've returned every year since, not to reject gratitude, but to honor those who were lost and to demand that America remember the truth. Today, the descendants of the Wampanoag still live in Massachusetts. They run cultural centers, reclaim their language, and teach their children the real story. They remind us that history isn't just something that happened. It's something we choose to remember. The real Thanksgiving wasn't a miracle of unity. It was a fragile truce born from catastrophe. And understanding that doesn't take away gratitude, it gives it meaning. If you believe history should be told with honesty, not mythology, leave a like, subscribe, and share this video. Because the more truth we uncover, the better we understand who we are.